Hey guys, I've been playing Honkai Star Rail for about a year now, and while I do think the game has been enjoyable, I do think that there are some changes, especially in the combat system, that I think could be made to make the game more enjoyable. So this is how I would redesign Honkai Star Rail's combat system as a game developer. So HSR's combat is simple, and to be fair, I think that simplicity aligns well with the broader audience that it's marketed towards. It's easy to pick up, visually satisfying, doesn't demand a huge learning curve, which is good for a game, a casual game like HSR, play on mobile, play when you just feel like chilling out, and I think we should keep it that way. But I do believe there are clear ways to introduce more depth and dynamic combat, especially people who want a bit more out of the game, all without making the game harder or less accessible for those casual players. So let's go ahead and talk about what the current system of HSR's combat is. Teams usually revolve around a main DPS, sub DPS or synergy unit, buffer, and a sustainer. Most teams work out like that. You can think of a team like Boothill, Ron May, Harmony Trailblazer, and Gallagher as an example for a team. For this video, I'll be specifically focusing on the damage dealing systems and characters like ultimates, break, follow-up, dot, or damage over time, as these are arguably the most central parts of the game, like how you interact, how you beat stages, because while you can buff characters, if you don't deal any damage with those buffs, then there's no point in buffing, right? But yeah, so for the scope of this breakdown, I want to keep it centralized, I want to keep my thoughts centered, so we'll explore how the active dealing damage in-game could feel more engaging and rewarding. And if there's enough interest, I'd be happy to make a follow-up covering supports and sustainers and how those roles could also benefit. But before diving into each category, I do want to clarify something. The overarching goal of these redesigns is to award people who want to do more in combat, reward attentiveness and interaction without punishing players who simply want to press buttons and enjoy the flashy animations. But that is where I'm coming with these redesigns, so don't expect anything too crazy or too major from this. Let's talk about the first avenue of damage: ultimates. Ultimates are already the most straightforward and impactful method of dealing damage in HSR. You have Seela's ult, Boothill's ult, Himiko's ult, all these ultimates that should deal a bunch of damage, right? And this is one of the things the game does pretty well, actually. You can activate an ultimate whenever you want to completely interrupt the action order of the game, which is nice. But what if we could make it better? How do we make ultimates more interactive? And my idea for this is a quick time event based ultimate enhancement. So taking inspiration from a game like Clair Obscur Expedition 33, where launching skills involves hitting a chain of quicktime events to maximize the effect, in HSR we can implement something similar, but with a slight twist to it to keep that casual player happy. Here's how it could work. When you activate an ultimate, a quicktime event happens. Think of the animation from Clair Obscur or any quicktime event from any game. Hitting those quicktime events in sequence as accurately as possible could buff the ultimate, either by refunding some energy cost, dealing more damage, obviously, extending debuff durations if the ultimate applies debuffs, or even a slight action advance for the ultimate's user next turn if they don't have one already, which I think could be pretty cool. Definitely rewarding players for actually doing more without actually making it harder for the casual players who don't feel like doing anything. But there is a problem, and I call it the tuning challenge. It's really just a balancing challenge, but I wanted to give it a fancy name. And this is from the development perspective. If the quicktime event bonus is too weak, people won't really bother engaging with it. And you might think that's false, but if you really think about it, if in CoE 33 you didn't have to do the quicktime event, like it added 1 damage to your attack, most people would probably just sit back and enjoy the animation, but you want to have some sort of impact, right? But on the contrary, if it's too strong, it could easily trivialize the entire game for highly skilled players, which devalues character investment. And obviously, HSR and gacha games don't want that. They want you to pull for the new character. So it's a delicate balance to strike, but I definitely think that the HSR devs could have implemented it. Now, some things with the changes I'm going through here is that I feel like it's too late, although I really wish it wasn't, to implement most of these changes, and that's being realistic. Adding stuff like this will make the game more enjoyable, but I think it would be too little, maybe not even too little, it would just be too late to save it from people getting bored, but it is just food for thought. That's what this video is. Okay. Moving on to the next avenue of damage, we have break damage. Break damage is already a really unique feature that sets HSR apart from many other turn-based games. It required pre-planning your team, understanding enemy weaknesses, and also any abilities that could block the toughness bar, and also timing your ultimates, timing your skills to make sure the right character breaks the enemy at the right time so that you block their big attack or whatever, right? In fact, I'd argue that the break bar is one of the most dynamic parts of the game, but there's an issue. In the current state, most players don't really engage with the break system because characters like Silverwolf, Anaxa, Acheron, Boothill, Firefly, and others just bypass the break bar or implant their own weaknesses, which removes all of the fun from actually theory crafting a team against this certain set of enemies, right? So what can we do to re-encourage the strategic use of break? Break is honestly one of my favorite mechanics. I love playing with Boothill, but I do feel like I wish there was some extra to it. So I spent some time thinking about this, and I ended up with two possible ideas that each are slightly different. Option one is the obvious quick time event. When you successfully break an enemy's toughness bar, a quick time event could appear, and similar to the ultimate one, and hitting it correctly would just give you extra action delay and maybe a bit of extra damage or elemental debuff depending on what element you broke the enemy with. Option two, I feel like is more fun and requires a bit more brain power that isn't just like a quick time event that you can learn. Okay, option two I call element cycling, which requires more team planning, which I think honestly I'd find more fun than just a simple quick time event, though you could theoretically do both. Imagine an enemy has multiple weaknesses, physical, fire, and imaginary. Right now, you would just use a unit like Firefly and use that to break the enemy's weakness. Or even if they didn't have a fire weakness, implant one with Firefly and use that to break the enemy's weakness. But under this new element cycling system, if you strategically cycle through each of the enemy's weaknesses before they get broken, they would gain a stacking debuff to themselves, or I guess a buff for you, your ally, your team, to do more damage, to have more of an effect when the enemy is eventually broken. For example, 10% more break efficiency for your team, more action delay when they get broken, and more dot from the break. So how this would work is you would hit the enemy with a physical, fire, or imaginary character first. Then you would hit him with let's say you hit him with physical, you hit him with fire or imaginary, and then let's say you did fire, you hit him with an imaginary character, and then now you can finish them off with either another hit from imaginary or physical or fire because you have that buff. But hitting them with the same element or with an implanted element would reduce that buff by 1 stack, or it could just reset it to 0. So again, this system, it doesn't punish players who ignore it. You can still just break the character as normal and do the regular amount of damage. But it will, I think, give a significant reward to people who actually want to theory craft teams. I feel like this would open a lot of avenues for non-mono elements, like not mono quantum, not mono imaginary, if that even exists. More team diversity using characters that don't implant weaknesses, which I feel like could be very fun. And it could give supports or sub DPSs more meaningful roles than just dealing extra damage or making your character deal extra damage by actually contributing to having more unique weaknesses. Moving on from break, the next topic I wanted to cover is follow-ups. And here, I think simplicity is the key. And honestly, I think the best way to enhance follow-ups and counters, I guess as well, is with a quick time event. When the character is about to launch a follow-up attack, have a quick time event. When the character who has counters is getting attacked, have a quick time event, and the better you time it, the more of a damage buff they get. Again, a minor damage buff only around like 10 or 15, maybe like even 5 to 10%, but it would still reward the player. Maybe you could play some like flashy animation or sound to just give the player a bit more feedback. I think that's one of the main things that's missing in this game is player feedback rather than just colors and big numbers. So moving on from follow-ups and counters to damage over time. I feel like dot is a really hard mechanic to make dynamic, so I've decided to go the route of not changing it at all. Quick time events or timing based things that happen when dot triggered would just be kind of impossible to implement, especially when you have tons of dot stacks happening per enemy turn. And there are also teams specifically built for having dot, and it's honestly one of the most fun mechanics with Kafka's Black Swan and even like Sampo and Pela and stuff like that. Having dot teams is just fun. Now it's true that dot is being overshadowed by power creep, although Kafka did get a nice buff, which helps with this. But unlike Break, which is mechanically bypassed by certain units with weakness implants and toughness ignore, dot is just being out damaged. That doesn't mean that there's a fundamental issue with it. That just means that it's not meta right now, and it very well could be later. Whereas with Break, you kind of could just choose to ignore the feature and you'd seem kind of dumb for playing into it fully, right? Especially when most of the break characters now have some sort of toughness, ignore, or weakness implant. It just kind of feels lazy. So now that we've gone through the 4 main avenues of dealing damage: ultimates, break, follow-ups and counters, and damage over time, let's talk about how these changes could actually impact the game, because obviously just straight up giving these buffs to players would make the game easier. Okay, so what do? Well, if we give players new tools for skill expression, the developers could easily introduce new challenge modes, or like a new endgame mode that's really hard if you don't have complete control over what type of dynamic combat you're using. Not dot in this case, break, follow-ups, or ultimates, right? If you don't have that down, it would become much harder for you to do. And I feel like that'd be a pretty fun challenge, right? It would be an endgame mode where not only you would need good characters and whatever, so Hoya could still sell you the newest character, which is obviously their end goal, but it would be more fun for the players too, because it would honestly allow weaker teams, I feel like, to have a chance in beating it. And they could also make harder versions of existing content like Pure Fiction, Memory of Chaos, or AP Shadow. They could literally just be like, hey, you know, have an extra challenge, here's like plus 10 Stellar Jades if you beat it. And everybody would do it if they could, right? So in essence, this approach could definitely give the development team more creative freedom. They could still do it now to make the game better, and maybe it'll bring people back. I don't know. And it would also encourage players to experiment more with team building rather than just chasing the newest character and just using that same team for everybody. I feel like having these enhancements, allowing players to have fun in more than one way with their input, would definitely contribute to actually having more fun teams, more theory crafting, more thinking back in our strategy game. That wraps up my proposed reworks for the core damage mechanics of HSR. This is my first time making a scripted video like this, so please let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree or have any changes or any other ideas for these systems. And also let me know if you want me to make a video on how sustainers, buffers, and other units could be enhanced through more engaging mechanics. I would definitely be down to try and theory craft some things about that. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.